Your furnace runs constantly, your bills keep climbing, and you're still cold. Meanwhile, 600 years ago, peasants heated entire stone castles using a system so simple, modern engineers are genuinely embarrassed they forgot it existed. What did medieval builders know that we somehow unlearned? Look, I've heated my home with a wood stove for years, and every winter, I'm out there feeding that hungry beast 3-4 times a day. It eats wood like a teenager eats pizza. But medieval monks, they figured out something that makes my setup look prehistoric. Back in the 1400s, builders in Poland and the Baltic regions took the old Roman hypocaust system and cranked it up to 11. The Romans had underfloor heating, sure, but they needed slaves constantly shoveling fuel to keep it running. Not exactly efficient. The medieval upgrade was stupid simple. They added massive thermal mass chambers. We're talking tons of stone and brick surrounding those hot gas channels. And here's what that changed. One fire lasting about 4 hours could heat a monastery dormitory for 60 hours straight. 60 hours. I can barely keep my living room warm for 6. The secret was the labyrinth. Hot gases from the furnace didn't just shoot up a chimney and wave goodbye. Nope. They snaked through a maze of channels under floors, up through walls, surrendering heat to all that dense masonry before finally escaping. By the time smoke hit the outside air, most of its energy was already stored in stone. Think about it like a giant battery. Charge it with a 4-hour burn. Then it slowly discharges warmth for days. The monks needed this because they had those all-night prayer vigils. Nobody wanted to assign poor brother Thomas to stoke fires at 3 in the morning. One documented hypocaust from 1340 kept rooms at 65 degrees for nearly 3 full days after the flames died completely. That's not heating. That's time travel. The fuel savings hit around 70% compared to continuous burning systems. In an era when cutting and hauling firewood could literally kill you, that mattered. But building one of these heat batteries wasn't something you could DIY over a weekend. The engineering required precision that would make modern contractors nervous. So you want to actually build one of these things? Here's where it gets interesting. First, you dig. Builders excavated a basement furnace room called the prefernium, positioned completely outside or below the living space. Why? Because smoke and fire tending never entered living areas. Your servants could stoke flames at 3 in the morning without waking anyone. Pretty clever for people who supposedly lived in the Dark Ages. Now here's the part that trips people up. The raised floor above didn't just float on magic, it rested on dozens of short brick pillars called pili, creating a 2-foot air gap underneath. Hot gases circulated through this gap, then rose through vertical channels built right into the walls. Your floor was warm, your walls were warm, even spots near the ceiling felt comfortable, but materials mattered enormously. Medieval masons learned through trial and error that dense stones like granite or sandstone held heat way longer than porous limestone. Get this wrong, and your expensive heating system cooled in 8 hours instead of 60. I'm guessing a few monks had some cold nights before they figured that out. Then there's the chimney problem. Too much draft? Heat escaped up the flue like your money flying out the window. Too little draft? Deadly smoke back up into rooms. And back then, carbon monoxide poisoning was just called mysterious death in sleep. Not great branding. Construction costs tell you everything about who could afford these systems. A typical installation for a monastery common room ran roughly the same price as building an entire peasant cottage. So yeah, this was strictly wealthy institution technology. Regular folks were stuck with smoky fireplaces while monks slept toasty. One last detail that separated good installations from disasters: sealing. Workers used clay and lime mortar mixtures on every single joint. Even small leaks reduced efficiency by 20% and created poisoning risks. Medieval quality control was literally life or death. But here's what's wild. This was just the warm-up. The Germans took these same principles and created something even better. Now here's where things get really interesting. The Kachelofen, German for tile oven. And honestly, this thing makes every modern heating system look like a bad joke. It first showed up around 1200 AD in the Alpine regions. Farmers were freezing their lederhosen off, and somebody finally said, enough. What they built dominated Central European heating for the next 600 years. 6 centuries. That's not a trend. That's a dynasty. Picture a massive ceramic beast standing 6 to 8 feet tall, weighing 1 to 2 tons. And here's the kicker. You fire it for 90 minutes, then it radiates gentle heat for 12 to 24 hours. 90 minutes of work for an entire day of warmth. My coffee maker demands more attention than that. But how? The secret is the internal maze. Smoke doesn't just shoot up and out like in a fireplace. Instead, it travels through up to 30 feet of winding channels inside the stove body. Every twist and turn forces the hot gases to surrender their heat to the surrounding ceramic mass. By the time smoke reaches the chimney, it's basically given up everything it had. The numbers prove it. Exhaust temperatures from a Kachelofen measure around 300 degrees at the chimney exit. From an open fireplace, 900 degrees. That's 600 degrees of heat literally flying out of your house. Might as well burn your money directly. And the surface temperature stays around 150 degrees. Warm enough to heat your entire room. Cool enough that grandma won't burn herself when she leans against it during her afternoon nap. Austrian studies actually found these stoves heat rooms more evenly than modern forced air systems. Why? Because radiant heat warms objects and people directly, not just the air swirling around. Medieval farmers stumbled onto physics that HVAC engineers charge thousands to replicate today. But building one of these required serious expertise, and the craftsmen who mastered it, they guarded their methods like nuclear launch codes. So we've got this incredible heat-trapping machine. But here's the thing. You couldn't just slap one together on a weekend. The craftsmen who built these were called Hafners. And they weren't your average handymen. These guys trained for years, sometimes a decade. Why? Because one miscalculation and your fancy stove either cracks apart or barely heats a closet. They had to calculate exact channel lengths for different room sizes, tile thicknesses, firebox dimensions. Get the math wrong, and your client's expensive heating system becomes an expensive sculpture. Now those gorgeous ceramic tiles covering every Kachelofen, they weren't just there to look pretty. The specific clay composition and 2-inch thickness provided ideal thermal mass. Too thin and heat escapes too fast. Too thick and the stove takes forever to warm up. The Hafners figured out the sweet spot through generations of trial and error. Here's a clever design choice. The firebox opening faced into an adjacent room or hallway. Servants loaded wood without disturbing the family. Smoke stayed completely separate from living spaces. You got all the warmth with none of the mess. Pretty smart for people without engineering degrees, right? But the real genius was the internal channel pattern. Hot gases naturally want to rise, so builders force them downward through baffles, then back up, then down again. Fighting gravity extracted maximum heat. Every time those gases changed direction, they surrendered more energy to the surrounding masonry. The fuel savings were ridiculous. A properly built Kachelofen needed only 15 to 20 pounds of wood daily to heat a 400 square foot room. That's about 1/5 what a fireplace consumed. My grandfather would have loved that math. And the mortar between tiles, it had to expand and contract at exactly the same rate as the ceramic. Otherwise, cracks formed, efficiency dropped, smoke leaked. So Hafners developed proprietary clay recipes guarded like trade secrets. Some families passed these formulas down for generations. The Kachelofen was German engineering at its finest. But the Finns? They took heat extraction to another level entirely. Now here's where things get almost absurdly efficient. Finnish engineers looked at the Kachelofen and said, "Good, but we can do better." And they did. By a lot. The Finnish contraflow stove, called a puntauni, routes smoke in a way that sounds almost too simple to work. Hot gases rise up. Then they're forced back down. Then up again. Down once more. Each reversal squeezes out more heat before anything escapes. The result? Exhaust gases leave the chimney barely warm to the touch. I'm talking near room temperature. Meanwhile, the fire inside is raging at 1,200 degrees Fahrenheit. That's like running a marathon and somehow arriving home with more energy than you started with. Physics shouldn't allow it, but here we are. Documented efficiency ratings exceed 90%. 90. For comparison, your average open fireplace captures maybe 15% of the heat it generates. The rest just flies up the chimney like you're trying to warm the birds. But why does this up-down pattern work so well? Hot gases naturally want to rise. They're impatient about it. So when you force them downward through internal baffles, they slow down. They resist. And while they're fighting against their own buoyancy, they're surrendering heat to the surrounding masonry. A 4-hour fire becomes 18 to 24 hours of steady warmth. No stoking, no checking, just heat. The catch? These stoves are tall, 8 to 10 feet in many cases. They dominate a room like a brick giraffe. Finnish families didn't mind. When it's minus 40 outside and you're burning a third of the wood your neighbors use, aesthetics become negotiable. One properly sized contraflow stove can maintain 68 degrees through an entire Finnish winter on just 3 to 4 cords of wood. That's the same climate where diesel trucks won't start and expose skin freezes in minutes. But the Finns weren't the only ones obsessing over radiant heat. Austrian builders took a different approach entirely, and what they created might feel even better. The Austrians looked at the Kachelofen and said, "Good, but we can do better." And honestly, they delivered. The Grundofen appeared in the 1400s, and it changed everything about how radiant heat worked. See, most heaters warm the air. The Grundofen warms you directly, like standing in sunshine, except it's -10 outside and you're indoors wearing socks. Here's what makes it different. The entire structure heats to around 140 to 160 degrees across every surface. Not hot enough to burn you, but warm enough that infrared radiation floods the room from all directions. Your furniture gets warm. Your floors get warm. You get warm, without a single fan blowing dusty air around. And this changes the comfort equation completely. A room at 65 degrees with radiant heat feels identical to 72 degrees with forced air. That's a 7-degree difference where you're burning 0 extra fuel. My grandfather always said, "Heat the person, not the palace." The Austrians figured that out 600 years ago, but the engineering is what gets me. Those walls measured 8 to 12 inches of solid masonry. During a 2-hour firing, all that mass absorbed heat like a sponge. Then it slowly released warmth for 12 to 20 hours. No thermostat cycling, no furnace kicking on at 3 a.m. Just steady, gentle radiation. The health benefits were real too. Austrian building codes still recognize these heaters as superior for respiratory health. Why? No forced air means no circulating dust, allergens, or whatever your teenager tracked in on their shoes. Families position these stoves dead center in their homes, so every room caught the radiant benefit. Many built bench seating around the base. Picture the whole family gathered on warm masonry benches during winter evenings. Basically, medieval Netflix and chill, except the chill was handled. Now, the designs we've covered so far all use channels or chambers to capture heat. But what if I told you there's a simpler approach that medieval Germans accidentally discovered? Here's where things get really clever. For centuries, masonry heater builders used winding channels to extract heat. Smoke goes up, then down, then up again through a maze of passages. Works great, but it's complicated to build, expensive, and if you mess up one section, the whole system underperforms. Then a Russian engineer named Igor Kuznetsov figured out something in the 1960s that medieval German builders had accidentally stumbled onto hundreds of years earlier. The Bell principle. And honestly, it's so simple you'll wonder why everyone didn't think of it sooner. Instead of forcing smoke through tight winding channels, you create a large dome-shaped chamber inside the stove. Hot gases naturally rise and collect at the top of this bell. Cooler gases sink to the bottom. The only exit sits at the very bottom of the chamber. See what's happening? The hottest gases literally can't escape. They're trapped up top, pressing against the masonry, surrendering their heat whether they want to or not. Only after they've cooled enough to sink down do they finally reach that bottom exit. Medieval German stoves called Kachelofen used dome-shaped internal chambers that worked on this exact principle. The builders had no idea why it worked so well. They just knew their stoves outperformed the competition. The numbers are pretty wild. Bell systems need about 30% less internal surface area than channel designs, but extract the same amount of heat. Faster to build, cheaper materials, same performance. But here's what really matters. In a channel system, hot gases rush through in seconds, maybe 10-15 seconds of contact time with the masonry. In a bell, those gases linger for several minutes, just floating there, giving up heat, unable to escape until they've cooled down. It's like a waiting room where you can't leave until you've paid your bill. Now, the Bell principle is brilliant for efficiency. But what if you combine medieval thermal mass with something those old builders never had access to? Modern combustion science. Now, here's where things get interesting. Everything we've talked about so far? Medieval tech. Brilliant. Sure. But what happens when you take those ancient principles and smash them together with modern combustion science? You get the Batchbox rocket mass heater. And honestly, it's almost unfair how well this thing works. The core idea is simple. Medieval builders knew thermal mass stored heat. What they couldn't solve was the smoke problem. Their stoves worked, but they still sent visible smoke up the chimney. That smoke, it's unburned fuel. Money literally floating away. The Batchbox fixes this with temperatures above 1500 degrees Fahrenheit inside the combustion chamber. At that heat level, wood doesn't just burn, it gasifies. Solid wood becomes combustible gas. Then that gas burns a second time in an insulated riser. Double combustion from a design you can build in your backyard. My neighbor thought I was crazy when I described it. Then he saw the exhaust. Barely any smoke. Almost clear. But wait, where does all that heat go? Here's the medieval callback. After the super hot combustion, exhaust travels through 15 to 25 feet of horizontal thermal mass. Usually a bench or raised floor covered in clay and cob. Same heat storage principle monks used 600 years ago. The numbers are genuinely shocking. People heat 1,500 square foot homes with 1 to 2 cords of wood per winter. Compare that to a conventional wood stove eating 8 to 10 cords for the same space. We're talking 75 to 80% reduction in fuel. And the weird part? This system actually meets modern emission standards. Medieval heat storage plus modern clean burn equals something neither era could achieve alone. Your grandparents would have killed for this technology, literally built into a bench you can sit on, warm seat included. But efficiency is only half the equation. What about when you don't want heat concentrated in one spot? What about warming an entire building with smoke traveling through living spaces? Sounds dangerous. The medieval Germans did it anyway. Now here's where medieval heating gets genuinely weird and kind of gross. German and Swiss farmhouses used something called the Rauchhaus design, literally translates to smokehouse. And yes, it's exactly what it sounds like. Smoke from cooking fires didn't go up a chimney. It circulated through the upper living spaces first, then slowly leaked out through gaps in the roof. Sounds awful, right? Well, hold on. That smoke was pulling triple duty. First, it heated the upper floors where families actually slept. Second, it preserved meats hanging in the rafters. Third, it killed insects and parasites living in the thatch roofing. One fire, 3 jobs. Medieval efficiency at its finest. The heat recovery alone was substantial. Instead of losing all that warmth immediately up a chimney, families captured it on the way out. Their bedrooms stayed toasty while the smoke did pest control. My grandmother would have called this killing 3 birds with 1 stone. Except the birds were cold, hunger, and bugs. But here's the wild part. People actually adapted to living in perpetual haze. Historical records describe families functioning normally in smoke levels that would send modern people straight to the emergency room. Their lungs paid a price. Medical records show distinctive respiratory conditions in these populations. However, they had significantly fewer deaths from foodborne illness. All that smoked meat wasn't spoiling. The constant fumigation kept their food supply safe. Then, government stepped in. Chimney laws in the 1700s forced smoke-free construction across Europe. And people complained. Families protested that their homes felt colder. Their preserved meats spoiled faster. The regulations meant to help them actually removed a system that had worked for centuries. Sometimes progress isn't actually progress. But smoke-filled rooms weren't the only thing medieval builders figured out about capturing free heat. They also discovered something about south-facing walls that modern engineers didn't formally understand until the 1960s. Now here's where medieval intuition meets modern science. And honestly, the medieval builders got there first. The Trom wall got its name from a French engineer in the 1960s. Felix Trom patented it, wrote papers about it, got all the credit. But castle builders figured out the core principle 500 years earlier. They just didn't know why it worked. Here's the setup. You take a south-facing masonry wall, paint it dark, stick glass in front of it. That's basically it. During the day, sunlight passes through the glass and heats that dark wall. The wall absorbs all that solar energy like a sponge soaking up water. Then at night, the wall slowly releases that heat into your home. Free heating. No wood, no fuel, nothing burning at all. Medieval builders noticed something weird. South-facing stone walls and castles stayed warm long after sunset. Way warmer than they should have been. So what did they do? They made those walls thicker, added more windows on that side. They couldn't explain the physics, but they knew something useful was happening. The physics are actually beautiful. An 18-inch masonry wall takes roughly 8 hours to conduct heat from outside to inside. So solar energy hitting the wall at noon doesn't reach your living space until around 8 p.m., right when you need it most. Nature's own timer. And the numbers are ridiculous. A 1,000-square-foot home with properly designed trom walls can offset 60 to 70% of its heating needs in sunny climates, using absolutely zero fuel. But what about cold places? Montana homes with trom walls achieve net zero heating despite winter temperatures hitting negative 20 Fahrenheit. The sun doesn't care if it's cold outside, it's still pumping out free energy. My grandfather would have loved this. He always said the best inventions are the ones where you do nothing and still win. Trom walls are exactly that. So medieval builders stumbled onto passive solar technology by accident. Modern engineers just gave it a fancy name.